So I think we're live. We've got some people joining us. So those that have joined already, welcome. If you want to say hello in the chat alongside, that'd be lovely. Let us know where you're joining us from. All the way through it, if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat, but we'll come to that in a moment. First of all, welcome to the Design Tokens Manager beta launch. Beta launch depends where you're from. And we've got some zeroheight friends on the call to tell you all about the new Tokens Manager. So there's me, I'm Dan. I'm a design advocate in the community and content team. We've got Nick, who's a product manager, Rosie, who's a product engineer, and Rob, who's a product designer, all who have worked on this feature. We've also got Neff in the chat there who can field your questions and help us out if we get stuck, which might happen. It's me. So it's general housekeeping. We'll save Q&A for the end. Think of any questions you have along the way and stash them in the chat, and we'll field them at the end of the presentation, where we've got the three of them there to answer all of your questions, all of them, no matter how difficult. No problem there, sure it'll be fine. So after this, we'll send the recording out to everyone that's registered, so don't worry if you've missed a bit or you need to step away. You'll have a copy of this so you can watch it over and over again. Share it with your grandma, your mum. They'll all love it, I'm sure. One of the main things is we do have a code of conduct, and essentially just be good people to each other. I'm sure we'll have no issues, but if you do, let us know in the chat, or you can contact us at community@zeroheight.com, because we just want to look after you all. So I've rambled a little bit. I think I need to hand over to someone who knows what they're talking about. Who would that be?
That would be me. Thanks, Dan. Before we jump into what we're actually launching into the beta today, I thought it'd be useful to kind of show a bit of the journey that we've been on in terms of stepping back to talk about tokens as they've existed in zeroheight up to now, and then kind of like our sort of goals for the future, because this is really about establishing a foundation for tokens longer term within the zeroheight product. So for people who have worked with tokens within zeroheight in the past, you may be familiar with one or both of our tokens blocks. We kind of refer to them as tokens 1 and tokens 2. And both have kind of always been about taking design styles and turning those into tokens in different forms. In tokens 1, that was about Sass, CSS, JSON variables based on all styles that were within a style guide. It wasn't really anything you could then edit. It was very kind of structured and maintained. And with tokens 2, it was more about just getting that into a JSON format, kind of following the draft community spec that was cropping up at the time. With both of those, they kind of answered a particular need of like getting tokens out of design and into development, but didn't necessarily answer all of the needs that you might have with tokens in your design system. And through kind of chatting with our users and getting great feedback, we sort of began to understand some of the key challenges that folks are having with tokens. So one was, our tokens approach was only based on design tools, and that meant it was limited by what those design tools could pass to us. So for example, we could only take color, typography, and layer effects from tools like Figma. We didn't get access to things like spacing or sizing. There was no way of then putting that stuff into the tokens output unless, for example, in tokens 2, you wrote that stuff manually, which then comes to the next problem of those tokens could be edited, but you had to be able to write JSON in order to actually do that. And with a largely more design-focused audience in zeroheight, that isn't something that everyone's comfortable with. So it wasn't always going to be a working solution. It's very tricky if you're not able to get the formatting right and you can't verify that until it's actually in the code base and being used by developers. The third thing is that it was very focused on this idea of tokens just being a handoff point. And whilst that is sometimes true in some teams, we are seeing more and more teams who, maybe their tokens start with their developers and actually it's about creating that sync back into the design tool, or maybe it's more of a collaborative process. And so it's really keen that everyone can kind of have a hand in that. There's also the fact, and this kind of links to the final point, which is, not just developers are making use of tokens. It is important for the designers who are using your design system documentation to also understand like when they should and shouldn't be using like a specific, semantic token or a component token, even if that maybe is a style still in Figma. Keeping that naming aligned is going to be much more beneficial for everyone, and making sure that everyone is kind of on the same page. So we took these challenges and we sort of took a step back. We looked at where the industry was kind of moving with tokens, and we ran a bunch of research around how we could be doing this a little bit better and speaking to our user base. And we kind of set out these kind of core goals for what we wanted to achieve with the next phase of tokens for zeroheight and what we wanted to do longer term. A big part of this was actually just increasing the support that we have for token types and token sources. So that's not just pulling stuff from design tools, that is integrating with code bases, that's pulling in JSON files that exist from other tools, and being able to make use of that. We know that a lot of people have like really heavily invested in tokens already. We want to make sure that people can bring that stuff into zeroheight and get that stuff documented. We also want to be able to support more token types, and not just stuff that is defined within the spec. We want to make sure that there's still that scope for people to have custom types that, might have a use case very specific to them. I think the thing you'll hear a lot with this today is we want to try and make sure that things are as kind of flexible as possible, because, it is an area that is constantly evolving. The second one, I think this is a big one for us, really. zeroheight is a documentation platform at its core, and we wanted to make sure we were improving the ways in which teams can document tokens for everyone. So that's not just making sure that developers know how to use them or can consume them, but also if you're looking at getting your designers to adopt tokens, if you're looking at helping other parts of the business understand tokens and the value of adding tokens into the workflow, we want to make sure that that's possible. And some of that is built around making sure that tokens can be more visual, in making sure that they can be used in more interesting ways, like inline and body copy, or even, we've started thinking about things about bringing tokens into annotations and things like that. The third point is allowing us to start to get a bit more into being part of the process of tokens, and also helping to move people away from just thinking about tokens in the form of a JSON, but making sure that anyone can kind of, edit and contribute where necessary to tokens. So making that more accessible to people in forms that they all understand. So JSON is still an option, but also, being able to have a more kind of form-based approach to building out a token, or editing or modifying that token. And then finally, and I think this is something we really struck on quite early, we wanted to really support the design tokens community group specification. We've had a couple of folks from that group on webinars in the past, and we're really quite keen on the work they're doing in order to try and make a standard approach for design tokens within the industry. We think it'll be really beneficial so that tokens can move between different tools, and so that there is no kind of like walled garden as to where your design tokens kind of live. They can move between tools. You can, move them from your design tool into your documentation, into your code base, and it all kind of works neatly. The other benefit for us as well is that with that specification being so well documented, it means that what we're building can hopefully be really easy for people to adapt to and transform their tokens into in order to make use of our tools. So that's kind of why we've been really keen to do that. So what does that mean in terms of what we're launching today? So what we're launching today is really a foundation for design tokens moving forward in zeroheight. So it is about creating a central place where your design tokens can be managed, and right now bringing those in via JSON. You can either bring those in by importing a JSON file into zeroheight, and then we have the option to export that out should you make any changes, or you can connect to GitHub repository and pull your tokens file directly from there and kind of keep everything in sync. We've kind of built a workflow in which we'll then push changes out into a branch, and you'll be able to kind of merge that, create pull requests, all that kind of thing. The other part is we want to create the ability for people to create, edit, and delete tokens within zeroheight, so they can have a little bit more control and build on top of what they already have. And finally, the most important thing is being able to actually document those tokens within zeroheight using a new tokens table block, which we'll kind of show in a second. So with that in mind, I'm going to jump into zeroheight and give a little bit of a demo of what you will find in the product. So the first thing you'll notice is we now have this new area within the zeroheight product at the top level of navigation for tokens. A big part of our thinking has been to try and move tokens away from being something that is specific to a style guide and actually become entities that can be shared across multiple style guides. So if you have a single set that maybe you use across a couple of different style guides, that is within the options, but you can also have multiple token sets as well, should you want to have differences between your different style guides or for different use cases like light themes, dark themes, whatever that might be. So in this scenario, we only have the one token set, but going into this, you'll see that we've broken out the tokens by the types, and we have a few kind of basic token types set out ready to kind of give a little bit of guidance as to what you might want to document. But if you have other token types within your file, those will also be populated in that sidebar as well. And then within each type, we've kind of broken down the tokens by group. So you can start to see where you might have, your kind of like base tokens, or then your kind of more semantic or component-based tokens alongside that. With the color tokens as well, we're pulling through like color swatches so we can show what those colors actually look like. We work with opacity and all that kind of stuff as well. With the stuff with more with other types of token, we don't necessarily have swatches at the moment, but we're looking at ways that we might be able to bring in thumbnails as well, so you can still have some visual elements around those tokens, not just rely on color swatches. Within this, you then see that you can kind of import changes. So this token set you're seeing right now is pulled from a GitHub repository. So I can import any changes that have been made in the code base into zeroheight and get that updated in my documentation. And similarly, if I make any changes within zeroheight, I can push those changes out. I can also choose to just publish changes into style guides. So this allows a little bit of version control. So if you are making changes and you're not ready for them to be viewed by users, then you can kind of keep this kind of siloed off for a while. And you can also export this to a JSON. So if you're going down the JSON route, you're not connecting a repository, then you'll be able to import a file whenever you have updates, and you'll be able to export that out if you make changes in zeroheight. In terms of from the documentation side, what that looks like is this. So I've kind of created this sort of color tokens page within our zeroheight style guide. And using the new tokens area, I've kind of set out a few different groups of tokens. So my base color range, I've also got my text and icons, and I also have my backgrounds as well shown here. And if I want to add some more, so say for instance, I want to add some border tokens, I can go ahead and add those through the new block. And this kind of works similarly to how you've probably seen like design uploads or synced markdown working, which is I can come in and select from this dropdown, or I can go ahead and search for my border tokens this way and add those in. And that will pull in any information that is stored within that main token manager. So the name, the description, and the value as well. If any of these values are aliased and are therefore referencing another token, that will also be shown within this. So it won't just be raw values, it'll be the aliased value that's being shown. From a viewer side, you'll also be able to copy the token name out as well. So making it really easy for people to grab that name if they need it in their code and make use of the tokens how they want. And we've tried to really think about making sure that this is flexible enough that if you want to just document all of your tokens in one place, you can go and do that. Like you can mix and match colors with other types. You can mix and match tokens from different sets. And you can also, if you wanted to document tokens specific to components, you can go and do that as well. So we've tried to make sure we're not being too prescriptive about how you should be using tokens. And we've also retained the ability to view a JSON of those tokens as well, if you want to expose that to your viewers. Back in the token manager, just kind of showing how these changes might kind of move through the system. Let me find a good example. So yeah, let's take our neutral primary. I'm going to update the base token for this. So that's gray 100. And if I go into here and kind of go ahead and edit that color, I'm going to change it to a bold red so it's really obvious what I'm changing it to. Go ahead and save that change, and you'll see that kind of color is updated here. And then if I go down into the neutral text icons, you'll see that has also flowed through. So we're creating these links between the tokens so that, as you would expect, changes kind of can flow through the system, and you'll be able to do this with anything you import into zeroheight as well, or sync through zeroheight. Because I made this change, I'm actually also going to push this out so my developers can make use of it. So I'm going to go ahead and push changes. I have the option here to choose whether or not I also publish those token updates into the documentation, and this will basically change whatever's in the latest version. So if you're using releases, tokens will still version along with your releases, so you won't kind of lose a version of history that way. But it means that you can also control when your style guides actually get access to this if you want to have a bit of a tight control on when stuff goes out. But I'm going to go ahead and publish these at the same time. So I'm going to hit push, and what we're going to do is we create a branch for those tokens, and we create a pull request. So if I go and view that, that'll open that up in GitHub, and it will show the commit I've made. I'll be able to view through any changes that have been made within that commit, and I can go ahead and merge that pull request if I choose to, but I'm not going to do that right now. In the documentation view, what this now means is if I go ahead and refresh this view, you'll see that that has now kind of updated the documentation view in this space. So yeah, that's kind of a quick view on what the tokens manager is looking like right now. And as I said before, this is kind of a foundation for what we hope to build long term. So this is really for us like a starting point, and there's a lot more exciting stuff that we have planned now that we can start to like work with tokens in this way. And so my colleague Nick is going to take us from there and talk a little bit about what's coming up next and how everyone can get involved in the beta.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, my internet's a little bit patchy, so apologies if I cut out to anybody. As Rob was saying, we're super excited to be sharing this with everybody here today. Even more excited about where this is going for the future. So for teams who use zeroheight already, we're often considered as a single source of truth for their design system, a central platform shared by designers and developers. And with that in mind, we see zeroheight as being ideally placed middle grounds, so not owned by design nor engineering, where tokens can live and be used. That might be in purely a documentation sense or in full token management. So the features you've seen today change how tokens are used in zeroheight. By bringing design tokens out of individual style guides, moving them up a level, we're now giving you a central place to manage these tokens while still making them available to all your style guides. If you're making changes to your tokens in zeroheight, you can now control when they're pushed out, both to other tools and to your documentation. We're also giving teams a much more visual way to understand, interact with, and manage tokens, reducing the barrier to adopting tokens for everyone in your organization. And of course, as primarily a documentation tool, we're excited to give teams more options for how you document tokens. Now, as mentioned earlier, this is just a start for us with this phase of design tokens at zeroheight. We've established the foundations now and are excited about where we can build on this to deliver value for teams who use zeroheight. For example, we're currently working on the ability to mention tokens inline. These will stay in sync with your tokens manager. Now, this is a small thing, but we think it'll be a really neat addition. We'll also continue to iterate on the tokens table and display options to keep improving your documentation. Now, we understand that zeroheight is just one part of an ecosystem of tools in the token space, and we want to ensure that teams can get their tokens in and out of zeroheight, no matter what tools they're using. And in that regard, we fully intend to support bringing tokens in from design tools, as well as more code repository platforms. So in terms of the future and where we can take this, I guess most importantly, we want to hear from you. So everything we build at zeroheight, we want to make sure we're solving problems you care about, and tokens is no different. And yeah, that leads me nicely on to the final slide on getting started with the beta and how to let us know about what you're interested in. So yeah, I'll shut up in a minute, but one final slide on the important stuff, how to get access to everything you've seen here today. So all teams who register for today's event will be automatically enrolled in our tokens beta program. This means you'll get access to the current features and future features before anyone else. The features you've seen today will be rolling out over the next 24 hours, so keep an eye out today and tomorrow. If you use zeroheight with a different email address to the one you registered with here, please reply to the email going out following this, and we'll enable the beta features for the correct account. Now, in terms of feedback, as I mentioned, this is super important to us. So we want to invite everyone over to our tokens channel in the Zeros workspace in Slack. For people who aren't aware of Zeros, this is a Slack community where zeroheight users can all chat with each other, as well as chatting with members of the zeroheight team. You should see a link on your screen to join that now. If you're already in Zeros, you'll see a link to head directly to the channel in the chat box. Members of our product teams are all active in this workspace, eager to hear your feedback. So yeah, please join and don't be shy. And that's it from me on the admin side of things. I'll shut up and hand it back over to Dan for questions. Thank you.
I'm so smooth with technology. It's unbelievable. It was seamless. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Nick. That was awesome for a walkthrough. We do have some questions, though, so brace yourself. Are you ready? So we've got a couple of people that have brought up the Figma Token Studio plugin. Curious, have you looked at that? How might people use these two things together?
Yeah, so we have done some investigation around the Token Studio plugin. Is something that we have been looking at because we know it's very popular. Out of the box, we don't support it at the moment directly, but they're trying to align quite closely to the Design Tokens Community Group specification in the future. So we hope that will become much easier to do in time. But until then, there are some token transformers that will help get you some way to being able to get stuff into zeroheight, but there'll be a few little tweaks you'll need to make to those files. So unfortunately, not immediately, but again, it's something we're going to be assessing as we go. As Nick says, we're quite keen to support as many token sources as possible. And a lot of this has just been the challenges of all these tools are evolving at the same time, and trying to keep up with what is changing can also be quite tricky. So that's probably
I think the supplementary question that goes with that about whether you might be able to use it by syncing through GitHub. Do you see that being something that people could do?
It would need some transformation first. So in the same way that you need to transform stuff from Token Studio into Style Dictionary, for example, to kind of resolve things like math, and I think particularly for us, there are some formatting issues around how they used to handle aliases. So if you've got older files, aliases work a little bit differently to what we would expect from the community group specification. So yeah, I think over time we'll get a little bit more alignment. This is the challenge with, again, the tokens group community spec being still a draft as well, means that things are changing on both sides. Nice.
I'm curious from all of you, but I'll start with Nick. You've had your head in tokens for quite a long time. Where are you at now, compared to the beginning of this journey? Are you sick of tokens? Have you learned a lot? Where's your head?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I can answer from a product manager's point of view. So it's a very classic jack of all trades, master of none. I think when I started working on design tokens, I didn't know what a design token was. Now I think I can answer that question. Yeah, I think what I'm excited about is the potential for it. It feels like a really exciting time to be working in tokens. Just the growth over the last year or so of tools working in space. For example, the stuff Token Studio are doing, it's amazing to see how quickly they're building stuff and iterating. Obviously, I guess there's a lot of noise around Figma native tokens. It feels like we're doing it, we're working on this at exactly the right time. I know we've done some stuff in the past, but yeah, it's been a really exciting project, but at the same time, it's just a start. And I think we kind of mentioned that a couple of times. This is the foundation. We're super excited for what we can do to build on this. This isn't just kind of a one and done. Here we go. That's it from us. So yeah, another plug for feedback, please. Please let us know what you want us to do with this.
You're a natural at this. Plug for the feedback. I like it. So what do you see like the end goal for design tokens broadly and within zeroheight? Let's go to you, Rosie, because you've not said hello yet.
I haven't, and you've given me probably the hardest question.
I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, you do, don't you? I think the end goal is very unknown. I think it's like such a growing sector. Like, I think a lot of what this project has done is made us as a company actually like reflect on how we've used design tokens, because obviously we're building all these new features for everyone else to use, and at the same time we're like, oh, we should try these out, and it sort of makes you realize how you go from like a JSON file and you're like, oh yeah, that's tokens, right? They're kind of fixed values, to then realizing that actually to get something to flow from designer to developer needs a lot of thought and lots of transformation at points, you know, as I'm seeing a lot of people ask, like, you know, Figma through to code is actually quite hard to do. And I think, like, from my point of view, the end goal is making that seamless, making it so that there's one source of truth wherever people choose to have it. You know, that could be Figma, it could be code, whatever it is, but allowing the information to flow, everyone to feel like it's all aligned, and it not be as much faff as it is at the moment is my dream end goal. Have I scared Dan off the stage?
Yeah, that was it. You pretty much nailed it. So I was like, I'm done. No, but I think that's the fair point, where it's that interesting space between design and development to try and make things flow really nicely. And I think a lot of the questions that we're getting through, like with Figma talking about having a native implementation of tokens, have you had any contact with Figma themselves? Are you aware of where they're up to with stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I can probably take this one. So, I mean, we haven't been in close contact with Figma at all, but I guess we've been active as we can be in the design tokens kind of community. So joining both, I guess, like kind of like different forums and kind of webinars and other things hosted amongst the community. So we've been keeping tabs in that sense. I think more broadly, rather than focusing on a specific tool, we've been thinking about standardization in the industry and the work that W3C group's doing. I know I've been on calls where I've heard from teams who have adopted tokens who are crying out for suppliers and the kind of tool providers to adopt this standard, because they can't until the tool providers do. And then from the tool providers perspective, it's kind of hard for us because a lot of our users out there haven't adopted this standard yet. So it's a little bit of, I guess, like chicken and egg. And yeah, I guess we're committed to adopting that standard and supporting it. And we're like really hoping that together as an industry, we will get to a point where everybody is. And I think we're doing the W3C group's doing an amazing job of that. And yeah, if we can help, then we'd love to.
I mean, on the standard, like, it's not finished as in it's final .psd. So were there any concerns about adopting the W3C format at this stage?
I can maybe go again. Oh, sorry, go on, Rob. Yeah.
Come on, Rob.
I don't think there was much concern. I think because we've seen so many sort of leading companies in the design and design system space really kind of get behind the specification in some form, it feels like a good approach to be in support of that. And I think, you know, we through kind of like other people on the community content team, we've had quite close connections to folks on that, like leading that working group as well. And I think for us, it's just really important to be supporting a standard, as Nick said. You know, we could have made a walled garden, and I don't think that would be the right approach for this. So we hope that, again, by committing to this a bit more, it will allow more companies to kind of look at adopting that as a standard.
Yeah, I guess one thing.
Nice.
Can I just add? Sorry, Dan.
Oh, sorry, Nick, go ahead.
I mean, I totally understand the points of people asking about Figma, because it's obviously such a big player in the space. We've heard secondhand that they've offered similar commitments to this standard, so that does play into it. We're not just being all like sanctimonious and high and mighty, like we will adopt the standard, even if no one else does. Like we do believe that most of the I guess the tools in this space will be adopting that standard, and yeah, that's why we're pushing towards it.
Brilliant. So there's been a couple of people mentioning about within zeroheight itself, whether you see tokens being extended into components. I guess that could happen in a few ways. So who would like to take that one?
I might. Yeah, okay, go on, Rob. Sorry, I was gonna. Can I clarify the question actually, and then hand it over in terms of answering, because I think this question could be interpreted in a couple of ways. I guess I'm interpreting this as the inspect view, for example, inside zeroheight, where you can view components and inspect them. How do tokens involve that? So yeah, it'd be interesting to hear. I don't know if everyone else interpreted it the same way, but yeah, I know, Rob, we've definitely talked about this, and you could probably speak to this in quite a bit of detail.
Yeah, that was part of my interpretation. I think I saw another question that was maybe related a little bit more to, I've seen some definitions of other component tokens, which I think is probably a bit bigger than what we're sort of looking at the moment, but could be something we do in the future. But I think particularly around tokens and inspect views and things like that, that was actually one of our starting points when we first started looking at tokens. We mocked out some views on like what that could look like if we sort of did away with, you know, sort of showing raw values and instead like properly had tokens in that view. And it's something I'm really keen to do. I think one of our big challenges is doing that in a way that doesn't put a huge amount of work on our users to go and tag stuff up, basically. So I think for us, we're really, I feel like we're really hopeful that once the kind of token support within Figma exists, that makes things a lot easier on our part. Again, it is something we also looked at a little bit around when we did some investigations around Token Studio, but again, works in a slightly different way to how we would expect. So it wasn't a complete, wasn't like a non-starter, but it was just quite difficult for where we needed to get to. And I think for where we need to prioritize our efforts, it was more about making sure we could support the majority of use cases first, and then look at building out that stuff as we go. We do have some thoughts on ways of improving some of the view and inspect. So we talked briefly a little bit about bringing tokens into annotations. So you could, in the same way you mentioned a token inline, which is something we're working on at the moment, actually put those in the annotation, so you could at least have that kind of more visible without actually needing someone to go into inspect. So you can call out like the key, like specific tokens within that view. There's a few other things that we could look at as well. So yeah, I think, as we say, it's a foundation, and we want to make sure that, you know, tokens aren't just, they sit in a table in the same way that like we want to move away from just being tokens or a JSON view. We want to think about how they can become a part of all of your documentation and an integral part of making that make sense for your users.
Tokens aren't just for Christmas. Rosie, I might be targeting you here because there's one at reference branching and version control. So Mark was asking, seems like you'd need them both connected to the same repo. Curious if you use any branching strategy for pushing new token data so you're not pushing into main. I don't know if that made sense.
Good question. Yeah, no, I'm with you. Yes, so we thought about that. Obviously, we don't want to push things directly to main because, you know, we shouldn't be doing that. You'll probably want someone to review the tokens that zeroheight is trying to push in. So every time you push a change from your token set, we'll generate a random branch name, which does have a format to it. So it's like, you know, date, time sort of stuff. So it shouldn't conflict with any branches you currently have. It will then automatically raise a pull request for you with the description filled in. So then you can do your normal review process that you do in GitHub, where someone checks through the code, runs it, and then merges it into your staging or main branch, whatever that might be. So yes, hopefully that will work well for everyone.
So the impression I'm getting is you've kind of thought of everything. It's pretty good. So we want a really big question. And so Dale has a corker. How do you manage tokens for multi-brand design systems? Is anyone prepared to step up to that one, or are we saying it's too big to tackle?
I'll the simple answer is that right now we don't. I think it's safe to say it is something that is on our roadmap, but will probably be a while before we get to. If you are really passionate about multi-brand systems and how tokens fit into that, we would love to talk to you and understand more. So yeah, we are really, again, that's like the key thing that we want to, once we've got these foundations in place, like, is that the next thing that we should be going after? So really, really keen to hear from teams that have really, really complex setups and how we could better support that as well. So I'm sorry that we can't say, yes, out of the box, it works great. But it's something we are thinking about and would love to work more with people on.
No, it's a great answer, mate. I think John as well, looking at my, sorry, Braxton was asking, if I'm already leveraging transformations of Figma tokens, will the token space be able to be displayed in non-JSON formats? His team is using both CSS and SCSS.
I can take this one. I'll volunteer for once. The answer is right now, no. So we're very much sticking to W3C format. So in your documentation, you'll either see the nice table view that Rob showed off, or there's a little tab that you can click to see the JSON, which is currently formatted as W3C. There are some tools available that other people have made that will do the transformations for you. So there's lots of tools that will do W3C into Style Dictionary, and then Style Dictionary, obviously you can go out into all those formats like CSS and SCS and SAS. So yeah, at the moment, no. But you know, again, sort of feedback, if that's like a really big valuable thing, let us know once you played around with it, and it's something we can look at.
Nice. And talking about requests and stuff like that, John was saying, can we get more controls or settings for hiding or turning off hex values? The general thing is more control, I think.
Yeah, I think that's something we'll be really excited to hear about more of. We've talked a little bit about what we might want to allow editors to kind of turn on or off. I think we had a bit of a discussion around, like, at the moment when we show values, we default to whatever the specific value of that token is. So if it is a raw hex value, then we'll show the hex value. But if it is referencing a token, we'll show the token it's referencing, not the value it defaults. It resolves back to, if that makes sense. We have spoken to some teams that actually would prefer it to be the other way. But for the moment, like, the majority of people we hear from sort of talk about wanting to show the value being, you know, I want to show the reference so that people can see, oh, it's pulling from this thing and so on. In case we haven't really thought about hiding values from users, but I think, again, we've always tried to make sure we're adaptable to what people need. I think an example of this is, you know, in the past, I think we only really supported like RGB for color values, and we've sort of extended that out to support HSLA and things like that. The same when we were building out the new color picker for the tokens manager. We looked at how we could make sure we brought in opacity, which is not something we've looked at in the past. And again, you can input via hex code or RGBA values or HSLA values and things like that. So we're always keen to understand, like, what makes the most sense for people. And I think those are, again, like, things that we really want to make sure we support so that things are right and accurate for the teams that are using our product.
Solid answer. Thank you. More one, I think, for Nick. So you spent a lot of time making sure that people create and edit a token is easy, doesn't require coding. So how did you prioritize the work? How did you know this was the right place to start for all of the token work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, short answer is we didn't know for sure. That's why we're doing this. We're building, we're trying to learn from people using it. So we're super excited about where this could go. This is the foundations. I think we wanted to build on what zeroheight already does really well, which is breaks down a lot of barriers. So with just as a documentation tool, pretty much anybody can get set up and build a documentation site within minutes on zeroheight. Tokens is a bit of a black box, or has been historically. We want to break down some barriers there as well. So get teams in. That's why we give you that kind of visual way to interact with tokens. We have that kind of, you can create a token or edit a token using our UI in the new token manager. We're not expecting every team to do this. We're expecting lots of teams to continue using their existing token management tools. But teams who maybe don't have a tool already could get started with that tool. Or maybe teams will want to choose a tool like ours. But we don't mind. We would love it if everybody used zeroheight for everything, but we understand that may not be the case. And for teams that don't want to do that, we want to make sure we offer value, say, via documentation. So yeah, we try to strike a balance between core, delivering value through kind of what we already do, which is documentation, making it easy to get into something, versus kind of building foundations for long term, which is more towards kind of what Rosie talked about, like the vision of that kind of seamless end-to-end pipeline from things flowing from design all the way through to development and being documented as well.
Brilliant, thank you. I guess, Rosie, being the engineer, this is another one for you. Will it be possible to make getting the tokens from GitHub read-only to keep that repo as the main source? I'm not sure on the context of the use case, and that's from Lindemar. So if you want to, oh, sorry, no, that was from Mark. So Mark, if you want to expand on that in the comments.
Yeah, I feel like roughly, yeah. So you don't ever have to complete the pipeline. So if you pull initially from GitHub, that's great. And you can keep importing the changes that you make in GitHub, and you never have to push them back out if you don't want to. But obviously then if you were to edit things in zeroheight, as soon as you pull the updates in from GitHub, they'll be overridden. So yeah, you can just pull them in and just keep publishing to your various style guide releases without pushing back, as long as you're happy to not edit in zeroheight and keep GitHub as your source of truth. So yeah, I hope that answers it. If it doesn't, chuck a comment and I'll reply in text form.
Excellent, text form often works. I think we're almost at the end of questions. Is there anything you lot don't think that we've covered yet that has suddenly occurred to you? That's a good thinking face, Rob. I like it.
Did you?
I guess from my point of view, sorry,
actually,
I think there's so a recent question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So the recent question has come in around like easy ways to manage tokens and things like that. Like I'd be super interested to hear like anybody's opinions on this, like so Rob or Rosie's. But also, I think what we're interested in with the Slack group that we're using is to get like different people in the community to bounce ideas off each other. So we're not necessarily experts on how to use tokens in every different setting. So from talking to lots of teams, we understand that like the context you work in is going to dictate how you use tokens, and we've seen lots of different workflows. So yeah, we're keen to learn from the community on this as well. But potentially, I don't know. I'm not sure if Rob or Rosie has any specific answers on that question on light, dark, and high contrast modes.
Yeah, I think for that sort of use case, that's kind of why we envisioned having the ability to have separate sets of tokens within zeroheight. So you could have a set for a light theme, a dark theme, or a high contrast theme. I think as we've spoken to more teams, like there are some cases where that doesn't work, particularly if you're kind of referencing across those sets. So again, I think we'll be able to support some stuff. And I think because we've looked at more as like themes, like if you work in other tools and you can kind of combine stuff into a theme and you have that kind of JSON file ready to go, that will work great. But if you have some slightly more complex needs around how those tokens interrelate, that's something that we want to learn a bit more about. So we'd be more than happy again to chat. I think, there is the Zero Slack, but I think also like Nick and myself will also say like we're on there. If you drop us a DM, we can set up a call to chat about stuff as well. And I just lumped you in there, Nick, but you're a PM, so you're going to love chatting to people.
That's awesome. So I think we'll get to the last question or two. Feels like it's almost about time to wrap it up. If you are on the call and you've got questions you haven't yet asked, feel free to drop them in the chat. If we can't answer them now, we can follow up and maybe drop them in Slack later on. So you mentioned about connecting more tools. Are there any that are top of your list? What would you like to tackle next in terms of integrations?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's probably PM's job to talk about this and prioritization. Yeah, so I mean, most popular tool is going to be whichever one each person's using, right? So we're actively exploring right now design tools, and we've kind of built a foundation. We went with GitHub first as just the majority of our users using GitHub, but obviously there's a big spread across the different code repo tools. I think we're totally open to hearing from the community on this. We don't have a front runner, a favorite. I think the design tools are the ones where we think there's a lot of interesting opportunities, especially with regards to what was discussed earlier around like kind of linking in tokens with components. So kind of how our design uploads work. So a very vague, fuzzy answer to say maybe it's a design tool, maybe it's not.
Rob, Rosie, you got anything you'd like to add to that, or is Nick kind of leading the way there?
We have full trust in Nick and his prioritizations.
Correct
Yeah,
answer.
that's accurate.
Brilliant. I don't see any more questions coming through, and I feel like we've kept everyone for quite a long time talking about tokens, which, to be fair, I could talk about all day myself. So big thanks to all of you for joining us on the call. Big thanks to Nick, Rob, and Rosie for sharing all of the work they've been doing over the last however long. It feels like it's been really intense. Again, like, everyone's really open to feedback. So whether it's over the chat, whether it's over Slack channel Zeros, drop everyone a line. Any observations, any comments? If you try it out on beta and want to feedback, we're all ears. And so, yeah, thanks for joining us. And yeah, hope you have a great rest of the day and think of nothing else but tokens.
Thanks, everyone.